Hey guys, Miss Sailor here. So today we're going to be talking about the Madison administration, 1809 to 1817. In his inaugural address, President Madison acknowledged that he had inherited a situation full of difficulties. He soon made things worse. Although Madison had been a talented legislator and the father of the Constitution, he proved to be a weak, indecisive chief executive. He's a persuader, not a commander. Now, Madison's sparkling wife, Dolly, was the only true excellent member of the president's inner circle. First Lady excelled at entertaining political leaders and foreign dignitaries. They called her the Queen of Washington City. So from the beginning of Washington's presidency, he was entangled in foreign affairs and crippled by his lack of executive experience. Now, like Jefferson, Madison and his advisors repeatedly underestimated the young republic's diplomatic leverage and military strength. The results are international humiliation. Now, Madison insisted upon upholding the principle of freedom of the seas for the United States, but he is unwilling to create a navy strong enough to enforce it. He continues that policy of peaceful coercion that had been ineffective under Jefferson, and it was just as ineffective under him. Now, remember that on March the 4th, 1809, Congress ended the Embargo Act. This was also the last day Jefferson was in office. Now, what they put after the disastrous Embargo Act, Congress passes the Nonintercourse Act of 1809. This reopened trade with all countries except for France and Great Britain and their colonies. Now, it also authorized the president to reopen trade with them if either should stop violating American rights on the high seas. It's in December of 1810 when France does issue a vague promise to restore American neutral rights. Now, the British refuse, and the Royal Navy continues to seize American vessels, their cargoes, and crews. Now, what this leads to is that some Americans want war with Great Britain. They also want to seize Canada. The idea that there are nearly 8 million Americans and only 300,000 Canadians led many to believe that doing so would be quick and easy. Thomas Jefferson, for instance, wrote Madison that the acquisition of Canada was simply a matter of marching north with military force. The British are also vulnerable far south. East Florida, which had returned to Spanish control in 1783, posed little threat because Spain was too weak and too unwilling to prevent Indian attacks across the border with Georgia. So in the absence of a strong Spanish presence, British agents and traders remained in East Florida. They're smuggling goods and they're conspiring with Indians against the Americans. So Americans living along the Spanish-Georgia border hoped that war would enable them to oust the British and the Spanish both from Florida. Now, in Congress that assembled in late 1811, new anti-British representatives from southern and western districts shout for war to defend national honor. Among the most vocal of these war hawks are Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Now, in New England and much of New York, however, there is little enthusiasm for war. Great Britain remained those states' largest trading partner. They don't want to trade what would cripple their shipping industry. One thing is for certain, though, the United States is woefully unprepared for war, both financially and militarily, and James Madison lacked the leadership and physical stature to inspire public confidence. The national economy is weak as well. See, in 1811, Republicans had let the charter for the Bank of the United States expire, the BUS. Many Republican congressmen owned shares in state banks and wanted the BUS dissolved because it competed with and regulated local banks. However, once the BUS shut down, the number of unregulated state banks mushroomed with all forms of currency. It creates commercial chaos. Now, we have the beginning of the road to war. We have the impressment of American sailors, British support of Indian resistance to American settlers in the Northwest Territory, specifically Tecumseh, who is attempting to unite Native Americans on the frontier. And you have the Battle of Tippecanoe, which revealed British weapons. By declaring war, Madison and the Republicans hoped to unite and discredit the Federalists. They planned to end the British-led Indian tax along the Great Lakes and in the Ohio Valley. Jefferson presumed that the French Canadians were eager to rise up against their British rulers. With their help, the Republicans predicted American armies would conquer Britain's vast northern colony. It does not work like that. So, why the United States chose to start the war is still debated. Its main cause is the British violation of American maritime rights and the practice of impressment. Most of the votes in Congress for war came from legislators representing rural regions. Economic interests of farmers and planters were being hurt most by the raids on American merchant ships. Now, Andrew Jackson also emerges on the scene. He is a proud anti-British Tennessean. He is the state's first congressman, and he announces he is eager to fight for the reestablishment of our nation, of our national character. Now, another leading factor was the growing number of Indian attacks supported by the British in the Ohio Valley. The story took a turn with the rise of two Shawnee leaders, Tecumseh and his half-brother, Tenskwatawa, who lived in a large village called Prophetstown on the Tippecanoe River in northern Indiana. Tecumseh knew that the fate of the Indians depended on them being unified, so he hoped to create a single nation powerful enough with British assistance to fend off further American expansion. So, after his brother receives a spiritual message, Tecumseh attempts to form an alliance with the other Native American nations in 1811. Now, William Henry Harrison, who is the governor of Indiana Territory, meets with Tecumseh twice. He describes him as one of the more uncommon geniuses who spring up occasionally to produce revolutions. Yet in the fall of 1811, Harrison gathered 1,000 troops and advanced on Prophetstown. What became the Battle of Tippecanoe was a disastrous defeat of Native Americans as Harrison's troops burned the village and destroyed its supplies. Tecumseh's Indian Confederacy went up in smoke, and he fled to Canada. Now, in 1812, the British had 250,000 professional soldiers and the most powerful navy in the world. By contrast, the U.S. Army numbered only 3,287 ill-trained and poorly equipped men. In January of 1812, Congress had authorized an army of 35,000 men, but a year later, just 18,500 had actually been recruited. Many of them are Irish American immigrants who hated the English. Now, the conflict, understand that the War of 1812, in fact, was 3 wars fought on 3 fronts. One theater of the conflict was along the Chesapeake Bay, including Washington, D.C. The second was in the South, Alabama, Mississippi, and West and East Florida. The third front might more accurately be called the Canadian-American War. It began in what is now northern Indiana and Ohio and southeast Michigan and the contested border regions around the Great Lakes. Like the American Revolution, the War of 1812, often called America's Second War for Independence, was very much a civil war. The Canadians, thousands of whom were former American loyalists who fled north after the Revolutionary War, remained loyal to the British Empire. While you had the Americans, a few French Canadians and Irish Canadians, who sought to push the British out of North America and annex Canada. In some cases, Americans fought former Americans, including families that were divided in their allegiances. Once, after killing an American militiaman, a Canadian soldier began taking the clothes off the corpse, only to realize it was his brother. Now, President Madison approved a three-pronged plan for the invasion of British Columbia, so this is our first theater. It called for one army to move north through upstate New York along Lake Champlain to take Montreal, while another was to advance into Upper Canada between the lakes Ontario and Erie. The third attack would come from the west, with an American force moving into Upper Canada from Detroit, Michigan. The plan was to have all three attacks begin at the same time. This complicated plan, however, is a disaster. The underfunded and undermanned Americans could barely field one army, much less three. In fact, in July of 1812, General William Hull, Hull, a Revolutionary War veteran and the governor of Michigan Territory, marched his disorganized and poorly supplied army across the Detroit River into Canada. He tells the Canadians that they've come to free them from British tyranny and oppression. Canadians, however, do not want to be liberated. Hull is then tricked by a British commander who tells them he will unleash thousands of their Indian warriors. So fearing the massacre, Hull does the unthinkable. He surrenders his entire force of 2,500 troops without firing a single shot. It's a shock. President Madison and the Republicans felt humiliated. They refer to him as a traitor and an idiot. Hull was eventually tried and sentenced to death. Although Madison pardons him, he is dismissed from the army for his cowardice. Now the second and third prongs also fail, especially the second, the assault on Montreal, which never even gets off the ground. Now, in 1813, near Erie, Pennsylvania, 28-year-old Oliver Hazard Perry supervised the construction of warships. By the end of the summer, Commodore Perry's new warships are sent out in search of the British, and they find them on Lake Erie. September the 10th, 2 British warships pound Lawrence, that is Perry's flagship. After 4 hours, none of Perry's guns are working, and most of his men are dead or wounded, but Perry refuses to quit. He keeps fighting, and miraculously ended up accepting the surrender of the entire British squadron. Hatless and bloodied, Perry famously reported, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." So America now controls Lake Erie, and it forces the British to evacuate to Upper Canada. They give up Detroit and were defeated at the Battle of the Thames on October 1813. During this battle, the British flee, leaving most of the crew members and the great chief Tecumseh with 500 warriors to face the wrath of the Americans. When Tecumseh is killed, the remaining Indians retreat. I'm going to stop here, and there will be a part 2.